Well, thank you all for coming. I'm going to tell you about a place. So this place is called Canyon Lake Community Forest. Here's a photograph of it. I took this photograph back in 2005. It shows Canyon Lake here. This hillside here is some old growth forest. The property boundary is right here. So all these clear cuts are just, they clear cut right up to the property boundary. Probably in the early 2000s. This canyon in the background, that's the Nooksack Valley. So you drive up that on Mount Baker Highway, and this is the back of Sumas Mountain in the distance there. In the foreground, this hillside just below where I'm standing was cut in 1993. And this photograph was just taken 8 years later. So it's great, the trees are growing up by then, and I'm happy to say, and sad to say, this view's gone now. I think these trees have probably tripled in size, so you don't really get to see the lake too much as you hike. This watershed is only 27 miles as the crow flies away from us, so it's pretty close. Although it takes a minimum of an hour and a half to get there these days. You have to go out Mount Baker Highway, through Deming, through the roundabout at Highway 9, to Mosquito Lake Road, which is by Whatcom. The Whatcom store is now open. It's a little community. You turn on Mosquito Lake Road, which goes down here. When it turns south, Canyon Lake Road goes up here, and you drive up a few miles. And unfortunately, that road's been washed out since 2009. So one issue with this property is access is terrible. From the road closure, you have to hike straight uphill. I don't know what the elevation gain at the bottom there is. Do you know, Andy? 1,500 feet? Yeah. And it's about 6 miles to the trailhead at the lake. So it's a huff just to get to the part I'll be talking about next. The alternate route is you turn on Mosquito Lake Road, and then the first paved road is a left onto North Fork Road. You follow the Nooksack up to somewhere in here to Racehorse Creek. Racehorse Creek, I don't know if there's a sign there now. No sign? I haven't been up there for a while. But the way you know you're at the right road is there's the world's biggest mud puddle that people four-wheel drive through. And you go up that road, and you go up a couple miles up this ridge, and then there's a gate, unfortunately, which is almost always locked. Most of this hillside is private timber company, and they lock that gate. Occasionally it will be open. Sometimes it's open to the public. That will be on the Whatcom County web page when it's open to the public. If it's not open on the web page, the gate can be open. You enter at your own risk because the loggers are in there. They keep it up, and when they're there, they close it on the way out. They don't check. Luckily, I was on the side of the road once, and they were leaving, and they told me, we're locking the gate like right now. So they can lock you in there. The beauty of that road is it's a much longer route, but the road is a gentle climb up this ridge. So if you're going to bike up there, I think that might be the better route to get up into the property. All right, this is a LiDAR image. LiDAR looks through the trees, and we see what the ground looks like. And we have the outline of the property here. So it's an irregular shaped piece of property. You can see the lake is here. And on this map, we've highlighted the area of the old growth, which is why this property became public land. The other things I want you to note on this image is these canyon walls are extremely steep. This here above the lake is basically a cliff. So many of these very steep looking canyon walls are more or less cliffs. You can see some very heavy incision by Racehorse Creek here. This part of Canyon Lake Creek is heavily incised. That is basically a cliff right there. This face is extremely steep. So it's really steep topography. This is all underlain by the Chuckanut Formation, the same rocks we have on campus here and in the Chuckanut Mountains to the south, which, if you know these rocks, extremely erodible. It's not very well lithified rock, so it's really falling apart. So there are a lot of landslides all over this landscape, which we can't quite see in this image. I mean, if you're a geologist, maybe you can pick them out. For example, all these little hills down here is a deposit of a big landslide that came out of this basin or this is a big landslide deposit. That's the headscarp of the slide that went down that way. Some of the features we do see on this are the bedding planes of the Chuckanut Formation. So like here, you can clearly see those bedding planes where the sedimentary rock is tipped up on edge. Likewise, in this canyon wall, these linear features, and over here, those are bedding planes of that Chuckanut Formation. So usually the sandstone's a little stronger, so it sticks up as a ridge, and there's shale and coal between that erodes out a little bit easier, that makes the small valleys. Well, this is the land of landslides. This image came off the DNR inventory of landslides. I just clipped basically the same area as this image. The different colors on here are not different types of landslides. They're just different intervals of mapping. But you can see, I don't know, what is that? Almost half of the landscape has slid. Historically, I think most of these were identified from air photos. I added the arrows in the middle to kind of show the direction the slides went. Here's Canyon Lake again. Canyon Lake is dammed, or was dammed, I guess, by a landslide that came down here. This is the upper part of Canyon Lake, and you can see some little linear landslide features going down several of the creek beds. Those are probably debris flows. One thing I can pick up off of this map is I think we did a good job of protecting this landscape and this old growth forest, because the old growth forest is on this hillside, and that's basically the only hillside in this map area that has not slid historically. So the forest out there is doing its job, one of many jobs it does, of keeping that hillside from sliding down into the creeks and causing debris to get down into the hydrologic system. All right, this is the Whatcom County Parks and Rec map of the forest. So I just want to talk generally about what this forest is all about. So you can see the size there, 2,200 acres. It is jointly owned by Whatcom County, Whatcom Land Trust, and Huxley College. The reason we have this joint ownership is we don't trust any one of us, I think, is the reason. If the county got in trouble, they might decide to cut these trees. Huxley College is facing a budget shortfall right now. We might decide to go cut those trees to make up the budget cut. We're not going to do that. But I think that's the reason why we have multiple owners of this property, is to hopefully check and balance to try to preserve this whole landscape. There's a lot of legacy of previous land use on the property. So once you get up here, the road comes in here. There is a parking lot and a restroom at the trailhead. The dark lines on here are the trails. Okay. You can see some lighter lines up on the hillside here. Those are old logging roads. Basically, this whole hillside, the whole north part of the community forest, was cut mostly in 1993. They were cutting this landscape as quick as possible in the 90s, moving up towards the old growth. That was really one of the main impeti, I guess, to try to protect this, this landscape, was to save this one last little remaining forest patch, which is basically on this hillside here. Okay. It was purchased for $3.7 million. How much money was raised before Paul Allen chipped in? Do you remember? Was it $1 million? It was around $1 million, I think, was raised, and then Paul Allen anonymously chipped in, I think, 2.7 or something like that. Right at the last, I mean, I think Trillium or whoever it was ready to cut, right? And it was saved right at the last minute. The driving force, I think, one of the driving forces, one of them is Andy Ross, who I'm talking to there, but the other driving force was a Huxley alum, Tommy Gaines, who lived in the lower watershed. He had seen debris flows coming down the creek, landslides coming down the creek as the hillsides were being cut. He did a master's thesis here at Huxley that demonstrated that relationship. And so he was active in the community, raising money to try to purchase this property and try to get other people involved to save this little gem of forest. Here's just another view, an oblique air photo of the property. Now Canyon Lake's over on this side. This pink line is the trail up to the top. Now this is open to the public. Like I say, if you can get up to the parking lot, you can hike up here, and then these different colored patches, not the pink lines, but the other colored lines are the old growth patches that are up there. So there's a trail right up to the top. It is a bit of a huff to climb all the way up to the top, but it's certainly worth it. A few things you can note, besides the thicker looking old growth forest up here at the top, this area had been cut probably in the 50s or 70s, and I think this hillside was cut in the 50s or 70s, so it's regrown a little bit. This is the hillside on the north end of the property that was cut in '93. You can see how little the trees had grown back by probably around 2010 is probably the date of this photograph. All right, so I'll just give you the little tourist view of the property right now. There are two established trails. One's called the Lake Loop Trail that goes right around Canyon Lake. My understanding is it is well maintained. The last time I was there, it was pretty well maintained. There is a very steep waterfall coming down right here. Here's a photograph of it. Like I say, Canyon Lake is basically at the base of a cliff, so it's very spectacular looking. Here's a picture of the trail, so you can see it's pretty, and this is actually the worst part of it. This little part is sliding off. But you can see how steep the sidewall is there. This is actually a 42-degree angle, which is steeper than rocks can sit. I was doing some soil work out here with my students one year, and one of them dislodged about a meter diameter boulder, which came down, almost hit me. So it's beyond the angle of repose, and so don't go off the trail. Those big boulders that are right on the side of the trail, you step on them and you can send them careening down the hillside. That's one of the old growth trees that's down by the lake. At the far end of the lake, there is a bridge that crosses the creek. That is still intact. And this is the creek, Canyon Lake Creek above it. You can see it's a nice mountain stream, has a classic step pool form to it. And there's pretty good forest regeneration along it, so it's pretty well shaded. I think it's decent habitat for fish. So that loop trail is about 2 miles. I'd say it's not strenuous. There's a little up and down, but it's pretty flat for the most part. The other trail is this one called the Old Growth Trail. It gets you, this lower part is basically a logging road, an old logging road that just goes right up the gradient of the canyon. So it's a stiff walk the whole way. You don't get any down breaks. You're going up the whole time. This is a photograph of it. Like I say, this canyon wall was clear cut in the 90s, so it is still largely surrounded by deciduous trees that are coming up. All the conifers are starting to come up and it's starting to shade, but a few years ago even, it was, you'd be walking in the sun because it's kind of south facing. You get up to the top and there are switchbacks. The trail does get really steep up here where it switchbacks. There are several washouts on the trail. This is one of my classes going through, so you have to be able to be a little bit more mobile than just walking on a trail. There are a couple bridges here that are washed out at this point. And I don't think there's any plans for those bridges to be rebuilt until the main road is rebuilt and public access is reopened. The beauty of this is you get up to this point, and there is an actual trail then, this old growth trail that winds through the old growth forest. And that is a little actually hiking trail that was built by the Land Trust. So you get to go through some of these large specimen trees. And if you go all the way up to the top, this is a logging road at the top, and you get this view. You look down into the Skagit Valley, which is all cut up, but then you get this view of the west flank of Baker. That doesn't look like Baker, right? Because from town here, the west view looks entirely different. So it's a great view of Mount Baker. The hike all the way up to the top is 7.5 miles round trip, and it's 2,000 feet elevation change. So it is a good huff. That's on top of 6 miles and probably 1,500 feet from the end of the road to the trailhead. So it's, what is that total? 3,500 feet elevation gain and probably 13 miles 19 miles round trip. So it's a pretty good huff. That's an issue with the property right now. All right, the lake itself, Canyon Lake. It is right at the trailhead. It's about a 45-acre lake, so it's decent size. It's at an elevation of 2,300 feet, so it's not that high. It is up to 20 meters deep at the far end here. It is surrounded by lowland vegetation, so the same tree species we have on Seaholm Hill and all the lowland forests around here is what you get around the lake. Even the old growth patch that's by the lake are Doug firs and red cedars and western hemlocks. There are a lot of deciduous trees on those recent landslides, and you can see this fringe deciduous vegetation right along the edge of the lake. Willows and things like that. Like I said, the lake was formed by a landslide. It was radiocarbon dated by Department of Natural Resources about 150 years. So pretty much anything you read about Canyon Lake, they always cite that it was formed by this earthquake in 1872. That's not verified. The radiocarbon date puts it in that neighborhood. That is a likely trigger, but we have no actual evidence that that earthquake in 1872 actually triggered the landslide. It may have, but we don't know that for sure. But it was over in Lake Chelan. That was the largest historic earthquake in Washington State, a 7.3. As you can see in these two photos, it is kind of a messy looking lake. It's full of both standing trees, standing snags, and a lot of down wood because the landslide came down just 150 years ago, dammed the creek, formed the lake. As the lake waters rose up, they drowned all the trees that used to be on the hillside. So they're still standing in the lake, although they're starting to rot and fall over. But DNR radiocarbon dated the outside of one of those standing trees to get this 150-year-old age for the lake. So a relatively young lake. I checked fishwhatcom.com, and they say it is full of hungry cutthroat. And I talked to a lot of people that say they fish up there. You can catch a lot of cutthroat. I have no idea how the heck you fish with all this debris. I think you probably lose a lot of hooks. So, and I did check the regulations. There's no special fishing regulations, which means you can catch your limit of cutthroat, whatever that is. I don't know what that is, but that surprises me since this is kind of a nature reserve. You think we would not allow fishing there. Do you know, are those cutthroat natives?
I think so, but I don't.
Yeah, we don't know. It's not clear if they're native. I mean, it's a native fish, but we don't know if they were there naturally or if fishermen have planted them in there. We've had a number of students, but not nearly as many as I would like, work out there over the years. There was the senior project done by Raina Anderson a couple years ago where she looked at the aquatic vegetation. She found 12 different aquatic species along the shorelines. She mapped out 3 distinct different types of wetlands as a senior project. So that's the type of research I'm talking about for you undergrads, that maybe you can go out and do a senior type project, which is a requirement for all of our majors. We had an environmental science master's student, Jesse Klinger, also worked on the lake. He was looking at the critters. He found 36 macroinvertebrates, so not plankton size, but larger insect type critters in the lake. So there's a lot of fish food. So apparently there is enough productivity in there to support that cutthroat population. If you're a lake person, it is thermally stratified in the summer, which sometimes means the oxygen gets used up. But in his analysis, he found that there is enough oxygen all summer, and the water's cool enough to support that cutthroat population. So that is indicating that the fishermen keep planting fish up there. So it might be a population that's supporting itself. And I think as the forest regrows, because the management plan for the property is to let the forest regrow, it's going to shade the lake, shade all the tributary streams, and it should only improve the conditions for the whole aquatic ecosystem. I believe, I'm not a biologist, but I believe it is great amphibian habitat. My observation of being there in the spring is there are tons of frogs chirping. There are lots of amphibian eggs all along the shoreline. I mean, like if you walk up and you're looking at a 10 or 20 foot stretch, you'll see a dozen bunches of eggs. So there are lots and lots of amphibians. Of course, if you know native ecosystems, that can be some trouble with the cutthroat. The cutthroat might be in competition with the amphibians, so we do need someone to figure out if that is a native population of fish, or if it's not, maybe we should take them out so the amphibian population can maybe do a little bit better. I'm not aware of any inventory that's been done out there, but when I was out there in July of 2016, I saw a big, big salamander. This is a photograph of it. It's not a clear photograph because it was in the summer. It was a bright sunny day. So there's this sky glare in here, but that's a rock right there on the bottom, and that's the salamander. He was about 8 inches long. That's his head. He had external gills. That's a leg, that's a leg, that's a leg, that's a leg. That's his tail. I believe it might have been the giant Pacific salamander, which is an endangered species. And so if those guys are up there, I think we do need to think about trying to think about that fish population and if they're in competition with these guys. That's not my photo, but that's apparently what the giant Pacific salamander looks like. This guy, even though the photograph doesn't look like it, he did have a little bit of that blotchy coloring on him. So I'm pretty sure that's what it was, but I didn't get a good photo because I didn't want to disturb him, and he kind of worked his way under the rocks really quickly. All right, now let's think about the vegetation that's out there. The definitive work on the vegetation was done by a famous forest ecologist here in Washington State, Jim Agee, who is with the Forestry College down at UW, and Martin Vaughn. They did this report in '93 to assess the property to see if, was this really old growth forest? We didn't know, actually. We knew it was some big trees, but we didn't really know if it was old growth. Now, I do have a PDF, if anyone wants to work on the forest ecology out there, I do have a PDF copy of it. The rest of it reads better than this ugly photocopy of the cover. The copyright law doesn't allow us to post it online, unfortunately, but I am happy to share a copy of the report with anyone who wants it. And so I'm just going to kind of summarize his assessment of that old growth forest. So there's about 815 acres of, whether or not it's old growth, it's certainly uncut forest. Okay. It wasn't cut because it is on these extremely steep slopes, so it hadn't been cut for a long time, but like I say, they were working their way around and it was under threat just before the forest was protected. Now, it's not just a one big stand of trees. Like most natural forests, it is a mosaic of different types of forests. And so AG identified 5 different types of forests that are up there based on local environmental conditions. Should also note, he didn't find any endangered vegetative species out there. So from that standpoint, it's not necessarily unique. The most common forest he calls a mesic forest, which is not unlike a mature forest here in the lowlands. So it's closed canopy. The trees are pretty tightly spaced together. Closed canopy means you really can't see the sky when you're underneath it. Not a lot of evidence of wind throws, so not a lot of trees falling over, and that's because the trees are so clustered together, it's protecting them from the wind. It has the common upper montane species for the North Cascades, mostly Pacific silver fir, mountain hemlocks, which are of very large size. They did some coring. They found several individuals over 800 years and one individual over 1,000 years. There's quite a bit of yellow cedar, and this is a yellow cedar right in here. So silver fir, mountain hemlock, and yellow cedar, these are the common species in the upper montane in the North Cascades. So it's pretty typical type forest for the upper montane. Large size individuals, as this photograph and this photograph shows, a range of tree sizes, and that is one of the characteristics of old growth. What it doesn't have as a component of the forest is a lot of downwood, even though my photograph here has a couple pieces down. The forest floor is more typically like this. Not a lot of downwood, and that downwood you know, fallen trees, fallen branches. That's one of the real diagnostic things for old growth. So it doesn't quite hit that criteria for old growth forest. He also identified what he called cold forests. This is kind of a relative term. This is on more north and north-facing slopes, so shaded more, so it's a little bit cooler than the rest of the landscape up there, so the trees don't do quite as well. So it's a little bit more of an open forest. So you can see a bit more spacing between the trees in these photographs. The wind can get down in there, so there is a bit more wind disturbance. You can see a downed tree right here that had just fallen. This is the root wad right here, had just fallen before we taken the photograph. Fewer firs here, so it's still hemlock and yellow cedar, a lot more yellow cedar in this forest, but fewer firs is kind of the diagnostic characteristic of this cooler forest. I should note on this tree, you can see the lichen on the upper part of the tree, and it stops right there. My understanding that is an indication of average snowpack depth. The snowpack usually is up about this high. You can see these people for scale, and it rests up against the tree, and it doesn't allow those lichens to get established. So we are high enough up here, which it's around 4,000 to 4,500 feet. It's high enough. They do get significant snowpack. And if you do hike up there in the spring, don't be surprised you run into snow when you don't expect it. It seems like the snow's gone. You get up to the top of this watershed, and the upper part of the trail, as you can see here, there's always snow in there. Pain in the butt. He also identified what they call dry forest, and again, relative term. Of course, it rains like heck up there, but these are slightly arid locations. They're really these rocky ridges, and sorry, this is kind of a blurry photograph, but the Chuckanut Formation has these linear bedding plains that are sticking up, so a little bit of local relief where the water sheds off. The soils have not formed as thickly, so the soil is on the dry side, so that's why he called it a dry forest. The forest canopy is a little more open, as you can see in this photograph, so the trees are spaced a little bit further apart. There's just not enough soil moisture to have as dense of a tree cover. The understories, you can see in this photograph, a little bit less material growing on the ground. Because it's a little bit drier, you tend to see a lot more hemlocks and silver firs and fewer cedars in these locations. And he also assessed it as lower timber productivity. He's actually a forester, and so he always identified the potential for timber harvest. The report was not only done to potentially protect the property, but it was also written for the logging company. They wanted to decide if they were going to sell it or not. There's a couple essentially non-forested landscapes up in this high country as well. One he identified as a parkland, or they're almost subalpine meadows. Here's a photograph of what one looks like. Here is a vertical air photo, and it's these open, lighter green patches. So they're areas where the trees really aren't growing. There's almost no mature trees, as you can see. Some younger trees, there's a little bit of recruitment of younger trees onto these sites today. But shrubs are the dominant vegetation. He didn't talk about wildflowers. I would assume these must be full of wildflowers in the spring. So these locations are very prone to wind damage because the wind can kind of whip through this open space, hit the trees on the edge. So a lot of trees on the edges are falling down. I think that's probably what is maintaining these parklands as open spaces over time. And then there's also some really wet spots up there that also don't have the trees growing as shown here. He called them mesic seeps, and they're usually next to one of the bedrock ridges. So this is one of those bedrock ridges that would have the dry forest on it, and the water that's shedding off that little rocky ridge is going into the depression next to it, making it extra wet. So they're really wet meadows. You can see a little creek flowing through this one. Here's a picture of one of the creeks flowing through it. So the soil at these locations is basically so wet it doesn't allow the trees to get established. So a lot of times they appear as these kind of linear features. It's really a low spot between those raised hills that the drier forest is on. So a range of different forest types if you're a forest ecologist and want to go out and check out the trees. They also talked a lot about the forest dynamics. How has this forest changed over its history? They did identify there was a massive fire up there about 850 years ago, about 1170 AD, that probably burned most of the upper part of the watershed, and most of the trees we see today have been established since then, and preferably there's more yellow cedar and mountain hemlock that have come up after that fire. There was a kind of a patchy fire that went through the property around 1410, that's about 600 years ago, and that's what accounts for most of the fire scars you see on the trees up there. And for the last 500 years, there really hasn't been too much fire in the watershed. A lot of those parklands seem to be more created by windstorms blowing the trees down as opposed to fires keeping those trees out. And then the recent history, of course, is the lower watershed was cut in the 30s, the upper watershed was cut in the 60s through the 90s, with the adjacent parcels, including some of the parcels within the property, cut in 93. So with all those wonderful trees up there, we've had a couple students who have looked at the trees. We had two Chris's that looked at the yellow cedar tree rings. Chris Robertson back in 2011. His thesis specifically looked at the tree rings of the yellow cedars, and he was able to determine that we can tease a climate signal out of those tree rings. One of the problems with trees here in the Northwest, in terms of using tree rings, is the climate is too good and the trees just grow like crazy. And so we really don't get a climate signal out of the tree rings here. To get a climate signal out of tree rings, you need trees growing in a stressed site, usually an arid site where you can, they're kind of just hanging on. And so when it rains a lot, the tree rings are wider. When it goes into drought, you have thinner tree rings, but because it rains all the time here, you usually don't see that sort of pattern in most of our forests. But Chris found that, yes, the yellow cedars on this site do or are able to tell us a story about what the climate was doing. And then Chris Trines just last year, or in this spring, I guess, went out and did a more detailed study, extended the record back by capturing some of those really old trees. He also pulled yellow cedar trees from Mount Pilchuck, and I'm forgetting the other site he used, but another site to the south, and came up with this reconstruction of temperature. So this is basically a temperature record of what the yellow cedars have been doing up at Canyon Lake. It goes from the present here back to almost 1300 AD. The gray lines in the background, those are the annual rings. So you can see it bounces up and down. We have a lot of variability from year to year, right? We still have that, right? Some years are hot, some years are cold. That always happens. The solid blue line and then the thicker blue line are kind of running averages of those to give us an idea of what the trend of the climate has been. And so we can see very clearly on the last part of this record the current global warming trend we're in, that climate or temperature in Western Washington has kind of fluctuated up and down. We've had some warmer periods and some cooler periods and warmer periods and cooler periods and so on. There's this big dip in the late 1800s, which is a global cooling known as the Little Ice Age that's seen everywhere around the world, where glaciers advanced, temperatures globally were cooler. Here in the North Cascades, about 2 degrees cooler than current temperatures. And then starting in 1900, you can see this pretty dramatic rise in temperatures. That's the global warming signal that's showing up in those tree rings. Now I point out this little ice age because I'm a glacier guy. And at the end of this year, end of this academic year, my student, Monica Villegas, is going to present her tree ring work on the south side of Mount Baker. And the preliminary results are indicating that the glacier, Easton Glacier on the south side of Mount Baker, was probably about 3 kilometers further down valley than it is today. And it's timed coincident with that low spot right there. So it was indeed a regional climate cooling, not just here at Canyon Lake, but a few tens of miles further east on Mount Baker as well. Chris also compared his tree rings, shown with the blue line, with a reconstruction of climate here in the Northwest, shown with the brown line. And you can see they're not perfect, so we don't expect them to be perfectly in sync, but they're showing the same trends, right? There's this cool dip over the last few years. Record, we're back around the year 2000. There was this cool dip in the 70s, this cool dip in the 30s. There's the little ice age is happening at the same time, two peaks of the little ice age. Back here things get a little bit out of sync, but again, you can't expect that with regional climate change. There's not necessarily the climate system is always behaving in the same fashion everywhere. So I love this. It's telling us that, yeah, these trees do seem to be representative of the regional trend and certainly the global trend. All right, now, I wanted to throw out some of the research that's been done there. This is not entirely comprehensive, but it's got to be at least half of the research. Not a lot's been done out there. So I'm calling on you students to get involved and work out there. Here at Huxley, we do have this Tommy Gaines research stipend. You can access the application through the Huxley Scholarship page. There's a button on there that goes to the application. You can get $1,000 to do research on Canyon Lake, anything. It doesn't have to be what I've talked about. It can be anything to do with the property or that Kenny Creek watershed, which is right next door. This money can be used for a research project in association with the class project, or I think it's ideal to support you doing a senior thesis. So if you're thinking, especially if you're thinking of going on to graduate school, it's much better to do a senior thesis as opposed to an internship. Internships getting you out in the work world. If you're thinking of going on to graduate school, much better to do a senior thesis, which is a practice thesis that you do for your master's degree, and then if you want to go on and get your PhD, that's a practice for doing your PhD dissertation. So you can get $1,000 to work out there. Currently, there's $8,000 in the bank, so we can support 8 of you this year. So please apply. Any questions on the property or the research stipend or anything like that? If you're ready to go, I'm happy to stay around and take questions, but if you need to leave.